Hey, everybody. Welcome to the third in our series of webinars. My name is John Ross, and today joining us on the call is going to be folks from both AvePoint as well as Rackspace. So welcome, everybody. Without further ado, let's kind of jump in and do some quick introductions here. So just to kind of start off, my name is John Ross. I'm going to be moderating this whole session. I'm a product manager here at Rackspace and also a SharePoint MVP. Typically, you're going to be talking about. Typically, if you're going to come out and hear me talk, I talk about branding and user interface design and things like that. But I also dabble in other worlds. Being a product manager here at Rackspace, I talk a lot about. Cloud stuff, and that's sort of how this whole thing got started. If you all do happen to be out at Ignite, that's going to be, I guess it's next week now, out in Chicago. I'm going to be doing a presentation with fellow Rackspace employee Randy Driscoll. We're going to be talking about making SharePoint sites in SharePoint Online and making them perform really good and do all those kind of good things. So going to be some cool demos. So please come out and check it out. But for any of the other presenters that are going to be on here, if you guys are going to be talking about if you're going to be out at Ignite, please let everybody know so they can come check you out. So I think who's up next? Do we have is Dux on the call yet?
Yes, sir.
All right, Dux, are you going to be talking up at Ignite?
Yes, I'll be at Ignite. I have two sessions. One's on BYOD, another on sustainable adoption.
Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself then?
Oh, so we're live. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I thought you were just talking to me. Such a pleasure. And, I'm the CTO of AvePoint Public Sector, and the cloud has been a great centerpiece of my conversation with a lot of customers in the past couple months. So looking forward to share some thoughts and really dig into this idea of ROI with SharePoint in the cloud.
Awesome. And I think up next we got over from AvePoint, John Peluso. So John, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I've been with AvePoint here about a little over 4 years. I'm a vice president in our product management team. Oversee all the different product lines through the product managers and product analysts that we have working on them, and have probably the most personal involvement in our governance and compliance product lines. So talk to a lot of very large and very complex SharePoint customers about how they do service delivery, change management, self-service, provisioning, things like that. I actually do have two sessions out at Ignite that I'll be talking in. The first one is going to be around just a sort of a checkpoint around SharePoint 2016, Office 365, all in or some type of hybrid, what's really makes the most sense. So we'll talk about pros and cons of each. And then I've got another session where we'll be co-presenting with Microsoft on some exciting new activity management APIs for Office 365, where you can get very quick sort of audit information coming down from Office 365 to do whatever you need to do with that audit information. In our world, it'll be around monitoring for permission configuration or management changes that may be out of policy and doing what you need to do about them. So should be an interesting conference.
Awesome. All right, Todd. Todd is a fellow Racker. And I'm nearly certain he is going to be filling lots of time saying words at Ignite as well. Is that true, Todd?
Yeah. So I don't know how that slipped through the cracks, but I was asked to speak at Ignite along with all these other fine folks. So I'm doing a pre-conference session on Sunday. So that's like 4 days away or whatever, and it is all about the cloud. It is about using OneDrive for Business and moving some of your on-prem stuff up into the cloud. So I've been deeply immersed in a bunch of this kind of stuff for the last month or two, getting ready for that. And then I'm going to, so that's an all-day thing. I will be exhausted. I will collapse into a pile at the end of that session, and then do parties all week. And then Wednesday morning I have a session on upgrade. It's for upgrading SharePoint 2010 to 2013, and then after that, I'll be done, and who knows what kind of trouble I'll be able to get in.
My favorite part is whenever we do these presentations, and I look at your slides on my machine, it always underlines your last name as being misspelled. So.
Yeah, I can't. I don't know why that's a problem. I don't. So I can tell you when I go over to Germany and Scandinavia, though, they always spell it right. So God bless those guys.
They're much smarter. So, Sham, how's it going, man?
Hi, everybody. I'm Sham Oza. I'm a senior product manager at AppPoint. John is my boss, and he's going to have all the lovely sessions at Ignite. It'll be my job at Ignite to make sure all of these other people will be partying so hard that they're late to all of their sessions. But when I'm not doing that, my primary focus is on our Office 365 solutions. So whether you're talking hybrid management, Office 365 apps, or all-in cloud solutions, I'm the go-to guy.
You just got to be clear whenever you say John is your boss, you mean John Peluso, not John Ross. We've run into this before, and we've got to make sure so we don't confuse the audience and everything.
Listen, for a few drinks, Sham will report to you instead of me.
Oh.
Yeah, what do they call it? A dotted line, right? Yeah. I'll have a dotted line to you, John.
Nice.
Yeah, and John Ross, if you could fire Sham sometime during this call, that would be if we could do that live, I'll pay you cash money for that.
I'm sure it'll happen multiple times throughout the evening.
So let's. So someone mentioned on the questions from the audience. Someone says that the audio keeps dropping out. I was asking if anybody else is having that problem. If anybody else is having that problem, please let us know. Ask make the comment into the question, and we can look into that with the Bright Talk folks. But without further ado, let's kind of jump into the session. If anybody does have any questions, again, I have some questions that I can keep us going, but would love to hear from the audience out there. So if you've got any questions, you want to hear anything cloud and SharePoint related, the primary focus of this talk is going to be, we want to have a good discussion around, kind of how can you get the most ROI with SharePoint in the cloud. But we've done this. We've done a couple other webinars where we've talked about kind of what is cloud. We've talked about kind of the evolution of cloud and how you get from on-prem and into the cloud and everything in between. So if you got any questions that are burning questions that you want to get out there, please feel free to ask. Even if it's not 100% about ROI, don't worry about it. Toss it out there, and we'll get it figured out. So the more questions we can get from you guys, the better. But let's kind of get started on kind of just a general question, and I think just to kind of reset the stage, this is a discussion that we had kind of from the first meeting, but or I should say from the first webinar. But let's talk about the different types of clouds. Just kind of set the stage for everybody that's out there. I know that we go in there and we talk about as it relates to cloud. I know that I talk about what is the difference between cloud and, what does cloud mean? It's a buzzword. Everybody's talking about it. There's different types of clouds. We've got infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, platform as a service. We've got SaaS, software as a service. So Sham, I know you're a cloud guy. Give everybody let's set the stage real quick on the different types of clouds that are out there and what we're talking about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so one of the things is some people still think cloud is affected by the weather. Obviously, there are three different types of cloud. When you're talking about infrastructure as a service, the way you want to think about it is it's as close to a traditional data center as possible, except hopefully you're choosing Rackspace, and you're basically provisioning machines within their data centers, and they're really taking care of things like virtualization and a lot of the lower underlying functionality. They're responsible for, obviously, the real estate, the hardware, the configurations, the redundancy, the power, a lot of the stuff, the day-to-day activities that you require to manage, a large-scale enterprise data center. Or in this case, with something like Rackspace or Azure, you're dealing with data centers for many, many, many enterprises. Platform as a service is a tricky one. This is the one where the lines really start to blur, but if you want to think about it, it's the operating system layer and below. A lot of the pesky tasks that you have to deal with on a weekly basis, these are the things that platform as a service kind of alleviates. So worrying about patches, security updates, Windows services, kind of the day-to-day either applications or updates that you're making that don't really have to do with the main application that your end users or your business is consuming. And that really kind of draws a line between platform as a service and software as a service, where software as a service is 100% dedicated to the application. And here really you have users consuming that service and that application and not being able to do much else, right? So they're just working within the boundaries. And so typically a lot of really good software as a service applications are actually running on platform as a service. So typically that's the delivery layer for very robust and powerful enterprise solutions that people then consume. One of our solutions, for example, is built entirely on Azure platform as a service. And at the same time, a lot of SharePoint environments like our own are hosted on Rackspace infrastructure as a service. So you can have different flavors of these three within your organization.
Cool.
John, this is Doc.
Yeah.
Can I jump in real quick? Somebody made a comment saying, hey, you're 8-10 minutes in, you haven't talked about ROI. So I want to paint a quick picture when you think about return on investment and really you're getting the value for your buck when you go to the cloud. So think about a typical SharePoint deployment. Traditionally, if you have a SharePoint deployment, be it a migration or a new environment, you have a budget. So let's say it's $1 million. So traditionally, you take that budget, and what do? You spend money, you buy licenses, you buy infrastructure, you hire people to go and deploy it, and let's say you spend half of it or 80% of it, $800,000. But really, why do we deploy SharePoint? It's not really to have an infrastructure, but hoping that through SharePoint we can facilitate better collaboration, better document management. But what ends up happening is that $1 million budget, our capital expenditure, 80% we already spent on the infrastructure. And then the remaining 20%, that's where we're going to figure out how we can better serve the business. Now, if you flip that model with the cloud, since we really don't have to worry about infrastructure, not that we don't spend money, we still spend money, but we're flipping that model now where we're given the same budget, but imagine if we only spend half of that or 30% of that on the technology, on the infrastructure. We don't have to worry about servers, licenses, backing up, having a dedicated system admin to do our Patch Tuesdays, and we spend the other 80% to address business needs. That right there is a huge ROI. And then we can also dive in more details around the value of CAPEX versus operational expenditure. Because once you deploy or invest in an infrastructure like this, it doesn't mean that you're not going to spend more money down the road. So if you have your own infrastructure, then you got to make sure, from things like power, you hire people to take care of the infrastructure. So there's the operational expenditure too, where if you look at the cloud model, it's much lower. So that's just a quick overview when you think about ROI, and it's not just dollars and cents, but the value you bring to the business at a faster period of time.
So one of the things that I've seen, whenever we talk about going to the cloud, and this is actually going to be something that I'm going to touch on whenever I present at Ignite, is that when you make that decision of where you're going to go, I think a lot of times people say, I want to go to the cloud. But once they make the decision of they want to go to the cloud, they have a platform discussion. That was kind of along a leading question to what I was asking Sham earlier. Do you want to go something like SharePoint Online? Do you want to go something like infrastructure as a service, or do you want to go with a managed solution like at Rackspace or something? But depending on which platform you choose, there's definitely going to be some challenges as it relates to ROI. How you deal with the different environments, and the ROI that you get is going to be a little bit different, I guess, depending on which platform you choose. Do you think that's a fair statement, Dux?
Which part? I'm sorry.
I mean, if you were going to say, like, your approach for how you're going to realize ROI is going to be different if you go to SharePoint Online versus if you're going to go and put your boxes over in Rackspace or something like that. You're going to have different approaches. There's going to be different, the way that you manage your solutions and everything like that is going to be different. So your approach is going to be different. Where you're going to realize your ROI is going to just be different depending on the platform.
Absolutely, because again, ROI is not just thinking about the raw cost in dollars and cents. In the end, what value are we delivering? Certainly, depending on which type of model you go with, be it SharePoint Online, Managed Service, Azure, there's different value propositions. It comes back to what are you doing as a business? Is it about saving money? Is it about serving customers better? Is it about being more aggressive and being able to innovate more? So it varies. So you always tie it back to what's your business mandate, and then that's where you can figure out and help extract what the ROI can be.
All right. So let's. So someone asked a question. They said, "Can you speak in clear and plain English instead of geek talk? What is cloud? Is it software or hardware? Most organizations want to know how we can measure ROI. Do we measure in terabytes, or do we plan to add hardware like document scanners to measure cost versus cloud storage?" And that's a pretty big question. I think in general, I'll kind of start this one. Generally, when we've talked about when we've talked about cloud in the past, if we get rid of the geek talk, the most simple version that you can say of what is cloud basically means that you're running your infrastructure on somebody else's servers. So that could mean very simply that you're going to take those servers that you are running in the data closet down the hall, and you're going to put them you're going to run those servers at a place like Rackspace, and you're still going to access those servers the same way as you would if they were down the hall. The only difference is someone else is running and managing them. So that's the most simple sense. You can get a lot more complicated if you're talking about running virtual servers with somebody else, or you can get very complicated if you're talking about running those servers in something like Azure, where you're not managing physical servers, you're managing virtual servers. So when you look at all that stuff and you talk about how you can measure your ROI, I think that goes back to kind of what Dux was saying. Really, it kind of comes down to, you're alleviating those costs of actually managing those boxes, but what platform you pick, you're going to be alleviating the cost of managing and running the boxes. But if you pick something like running those servers in Azure, there's still boxes that you're going to have to manage. There's still licensing involved, and there's still other things. So it becomes challenging in terms of based on which platform, how much ROI you can see, and all that stuff. And I think to kind of keep going a little bit, to keep going to some of it, and I know that someone else commented that they really do like the geek talk. So when we go into talking about ROI, and there's another good question here that was talking about, as you move more of your infrastructure to the cloud, what impact have you typically seen with regard to internet bandwidth costs, and how has that factored into the ROI? Now, Todd, what's your thought on this? Because obviously, if you're putting something in the cloud, if you're running your servers in someone else's data center, your internet bandwidth is going to be kind of important, or else cloud stuff isn't going to work so well.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is a dated joke or not, but one of the first things you want to do is get friendly with all the backhoe operators in your area, because those guys can sniff out a line of fiber underground. I saw somebody's email sig once that said, if you're ever lost, I always carry a 6-inch piece of fiber with me, so if I ever get lost, I can bury it and then ask the backhoe operator for directions. So yeah, the internet connection is huge. So you don't want it to go out. You don't want a backhoe operator to sever it. But the other thing is, I think, especially as SharePoint folks, we don't think about bandwidth other than, when we're trying to stream radio stations and Pandora skips. But like you said, when we start moving things out into other people's hosting centers, into the cloud, that the bandwidth becomes very important. And so one of the things when I do my session on Sunday about OneDrive for Business that I'm going to talk about is bandwidth. And Microsoft has published this Excel spreadsheet that is a bandwidth calculator for OneDrive for Business. But of course, this will work with anything in the cloud, but it's specific to OneDrive for Business. And so you can put in there, how many users you have and what time zones you have and things like that. And it will give you an idea what kind of bandwidth OneDrive for Business, or in this case, all of your SharePoint stuff, will take at what times during the day. And so you can look at that. You can see the bandwidth that this is going to take. You can compare it to what your bandwidth is. You can talk to your network guys and make sure that they have that kind of headroom, because that's going to be a big deal. And that's another thing you should do is cozy up to your network guys and see what your bandwidth is like. Are you using half the pipe that you have to the internet? Are you struggling to keep up now? Because that's one of those things that we don't always think about. We, as IT pros, I get very excited about turning knobs and flipping switches and synchronizing AD to the cloud and all this kind of stuff, but I don't ever think about that roadmap, that road that takes out of the building. So you definitely want to talk to your infrastructure guys. Look at that bandwidth calculator, and I think if you just go out to Bing and do OneDrive bandwidth calculator, I think it's one of the top hits there. But that will give you some idea how much space you're going to need to make this all work.
Well, I think one of the challenges here, and this is kind of relative, I think this is sort of important to note, is that whenever we're running in, the typical setup where we've got SharePoint or other systems running in the data closet down the hall, if, Susie in accounting comes to us and says, hey, things are running slow, Todd, you can go run and you can jiggle wires and you can kind of figure things out and kind of make it faster. Whenever you're dealing with kind of going across the wire into the cloud and things are running slow, sometimes it's a little bit trickier in order to figure out, how do I speed it up, right?
Yeah, and to the end user, they don't know, nor do they care about where this is at. They don't care if it's in the closet. They don't care if it's across the world. They don't care. They just want it to work. And so, yeah, that's something that we have to abstract from them. We have to protect them from that. So the fact that somebody asked that question impresses me. That they're thinking that far down the line. That's impressive.
So there's an interesting analogy that I've used in the past, especially when people ask that question. They don't want to hear the geek speak. So you can have a well in your backyard, right? You're responsible for maintaining the well. You're responsible for the quality of the water. You don't pay anything for it to the city, right? It's your responsibility to make sure that it's up and it's running and it's working. But if you already have that well at your house, the prospect of switching over to city water seems to be more expensive, right? Because you now have a recurring payment that for what before was essentially a sunk cost that you didn't think about. Moving on to a fully sort of hosted cloud service like an Office 365 is literally like signing up with the city for water service. You open the tap, as John said, you get the flavor and brand and quality of water that Microsoft's serving. You can't make it faster. You can't increase the water pressure. You have what you have. And so when you look at, when you're thinking about investment and Dux mentioned capital expense versus operational expense, I think, one of the reasons why ROI measurements are hard to calculate on some level is because they're really apples and oranges in terms of being able to go back and when did I buy this server and how much did I pay for it and how much do I pay to replace disk drives and all this kind of stuff versus what is Microsoft going to send me a bill for every month.
Yeah. And I think that focus is probably what's most important. People think that by moving to the cloud, and typically anyone who's going to try and sell you on a cloud solution or application is going to say, when you move to the cloud, look at all of these things you're cutting out, right? But there are also additional investments you may have to make. So, for example, while I might get rid of my data center, while I don't have to think about electricity costs and real estate costs and management, I may have to start thinking about purchasing WAN accelerators. I may have to start thinking about, beefing up my cable connection or my fiber connection, and deciding on what I'm going to be doing with these other aspects that I have to worry about, like ADFS and other technology investments and components. But what is most important is educating the business on the value of the application they've purchased. And I think this is one type of ROI that you can't measure in dollars or you can't measure in gigs, which is IT spends about 80 to 90% of their time managing infrastructure, handling tickets, support tickets, and fixing and maintaining things. They're not teaching the business how they can more effectively collaborate using OneDrive for Business. They can't show somebody, sit down and run a 1 to 2 hour, lunch and learn with the team on how to use their sync client or how to update tasks in project and really train, the business, the information workers on how to make the best of their platform. So I think while you are shifting costs, and obviously you're going to be making some savings, right? So I get rid of the infrastructure and I move to WAN accelerators and a subscription model in Office 365 or with Rackspace. But I think one of the kind of, again, like I said, you can't measure it in gigs or dollars, but that time that an infrastructure manager or the staff get back is invaluable. And one of the things I've always heard is somebody says, well, the cloud is going to get rid of all of these IT jobs. Well, if your primary focus was just upgrading memory and applying patches, then you didn't have much value, to the business anyway. I think what's really important is IT now is able to refocus on showing the business, hey, here's all this cool stuff that we've bought, and you don't have to worry about spending time explaining to them why it's slow, why you have to update it, why that last patch that you applied broke everything. You're more focusing on, here are the 10 new shiny features that I want to focus on this week and how they're going to make our business more productive. So I think that's, if you eliminate all of the tech talk, being able to have lunch and learns, being able to have training sessions, being able to show off cool technology and listen to the business and decide on what application or subscription you need to roll up next, rather than how many cores you're going to need to invest in, I think is a huge differentiator. So if we're going to talk about ROI, definitely keep that in mind.
And this is Dustin.
Go ahead.
Let me jump in. So Sean raised a great point about two things. Right? First, on the role of IT. I just sent a tweet on a great article talking about how IT should think about their role in this age of cloud. And Sean hit the nail on the head. It's this idea of being a more relational. You talk about social networking. This is true social networking, spending more time with the business, face-to-face, talking about solutions, and then not that they're not going to touch the infrastructure anymore since it's in the cloud. They'll do that, but they'll, like Sean says, there's going to be more time focused on helping the business. And then second is, from an ROI perspective, it's just the scale. John's example about the well. I mean, your well can only produce so much water, but what if suddenly you're going to host a wedding party at your house? Your well can't provide all that water you need for all the drinks you're going to make, right? So from a scale perspective, that's yet another big ROI. An example I use is in the recent Super Bowl. The streaming was done in Azure Media Streaming, and everybody got rave reviews on how fluid, how smooth the online streaming was for the Super Bowl, and they did a world record on how many streams they had, ongoing streams at the same period of time. I forgot what the stats are, but again, if NFL had to do it on-prem, they couldn't scale that fast and that much, giving that quality experience to all their audience out there.
Yeah, and they could have delivered that experience, but imagine that sunk cost, right? So if I need X number of servers or X number of investment to deliver this streaming service during the Super Bowl, fine, I can buy that, I can make that investment, but honestly, until the next Super Bowl, what am I going to do with that investment? So that elasticity, another one of those buzzwords when you hear about the cloud, but I think this is a great example of that, right? If I need a very, very large pipe, if I need, a lot of processing all at once for the Super Bowl, that's great. This cloud architecture is there for me to be able to provide that service. And then if I have to wait until the next Super Bowl, that's fine. None of this stuff is a sunk cost. I don't have a giant paperweight sitting in my data center.
There's actually, hey, John, there's a really interesting question up there, I think, that takes the conversation in a little bit of a different direction than we've been talking about. And that is, someone's asking about a strategy for migrating farm solutions to Office 365. So my guess is the question was looking for some tech support, but instead let's spin an ROI on that, right? Because one idea here that you've got to think about is really making sure that whatever cloud flavor you are thinking of adopting, it is capable and it is feasible to move any required applications to that platform. So, for example, we've got customers that have very, very heavy amounts of SharePoint solutions in their 2010 environments, some even in their 2013 environments, and the idea of taking those full trust code solutions and transforming them, while it's a great opportunity to modernize those applications, that is and can be a significant cost. So for them, some type of hybrid deployment is what they settled on, where for the majority of their collaboration sites, they've chosen to go with sort of the SaaS service of SharePoint, whereas for their applications areas, their custom applications, they're choosing to maintain those on-premise as well. So I think, not only is there a technical aspect of that move, whether it's a migration or re-architecting of an application, but there's also a cost that's in there that needs to be considered as well.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things, at least, that I'm going to talk about in my presentation when we talk about kind of choosing a platform. Is that when you go from on-prem to the cloud, it's something that you have to consider the different techniques that you're going to have to use to achieve the same goal. You can't just necessarily, when you talk about taking full trust solutions, maybe you can't just do it in SharePoint Online. You're going to have to re-architect some of those solutions, do them in a new, using the new SharePoint development model and everything. And you've got to ask yourself, are your devs familiar with that approach? Is it something that you can easily do? And if they're not, you're exactly right. Then that's going to impact your platform decision on whether or not you would go with something like a SharePoint Online, and that's going to give you other choices. And so, just to kind of clarify again, there's been some additional questions that are talking about. There's a really good question that was talking about. I love some of the questions that are almost that are really you're being really hard on us, and I actually really like some of those questions. But someone starts off the question: isn't this webinar supposed to be explaining SharePoint SaaS and how this will be cost effective? And I just want to clarify that that's why we've kind of restated it several times, that when you talk about the cloud Microsoft uses the term cloud to specifically refer often to SharePoint Online. And yes, that is SharePoint in the cloud in a SaaS configuration, but you can run SharePoint in Azure, for example. You can run it in Rackspace, and those are all cloud solutions. But just to, for the sake of terminology, Microsoft refers to SharePoint in SharePoint Online as the cloud. They also refer to running SharePoint in Azure as the cloud. But in reality, anything that is not in SharePoint Online is basically considered on-prem.
So John, real quick, do you think it's feasible for us just to do a quick math, right? If people want to get raw numbers, let's paint a scenario of, given, 1,000 people in your organization, what will it look like between these different environments? Now, certainly there's different capabilities and features, but just raw numbers, what would it look like?
Sure.
So one thing I would say is, for the people looking for the raw numbers, I guess I definitely understand where these questions are coming from. And the best way I would describe that is you kind of have to create a list of both the tangible and the intangible costs. And so the first thing you want to do is obviously identify what services your end users are interested in. So if they're talking about the basics like file sync and share, then you're looking at comparing the costs of things like the on-prem file shares that you have today versus something like a OneDrive for Business or a Box or SharePoint being hosted on IaaS. If you're looking at a much more mature services offering that you want your business to consume, things like social, then you might be thinking about Yammer, SharePoint, and other components. And so one of the things you might want to do is just think about, in order to support that service, what the on-prem cost would be and what the online cost would be. And when you look at something like SharePoint or OneDrive, you have to think about the infrastructure not just from a server perspective, but also from a storage perspective. So every single document your users generate, every single version that your users may need to keep, whether it's because of regulatory reasons, just because people make mistakes, all of those things are going to end up in tangible, measurable costs, right? And when you look at something like Office 365, or even, when you're looking at Rackspace, the cost of storage and the cost of that infrastructure dip down very, very considerably. And then you have the intangible cost of being able to look at what happens when the business can be more engaged, but also things like, being able to understand the availability of an application to your end users and how much you would have to invest in order to make it available to everyone else is something that you can calculate. So I think you're looking at tangible and intangible. And the last thing is eliminating risk, which is around the application. So that was the third point that John made, where there is going to be a cost, no matter what, in converting an old legacy application you have on-prem into something online. And everyone looks at the numbers involved when it comes to how long it'll take me to convert the code, how much a dev is going to cost me, and what the potential setbacks are. But a lot of times people don't look at the fact that the old code, A, might not be in use anymore, B, might be replaced with a more robust and out-of-the-box functionality, or C, is something that might be deprecated in the coming months or year. And once something is deprecated, there aren't security updates. The talent and the expertise in order to manage and maintain that solution might start to fade. And so there is a cost in maintaining some kind of code on-prem, rather than just looking at, I already made this investment in this system and there isn't going to be an additional cost. That's not necessarily true. So I would look at those three things, right? The absolute obvious tangible cost, the intangible ones that you get as business value, and then eliminating risk, I think, are the three measures of ROI.
So Sean.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so Sean, let's say a typical organization, right? Typical workload, SharePoint's being used on the internet, team sites. What would that look like? 1,000 people, just quick raw numbers. What would that look like with SharePoint Online? Let's say they get the bare bones. Let's just talk SharePoint, not even an E3 plan. What would it look like if we put it in an environment like Rackspace and other comparable environments?
Yeah, you'd have to have the SharePoint server set up. You'd have to have Active Directory configured on-prem. You would have to have servers set up for Office web apps. So even looking at that, you're looking at a very, very sizable investment. And for an organization, typically in the couple hundreds of users, that investment is already above and beyond what you would be paying for an Office subscription. So I think for the organizations that are less than 1,000 users, investing into an online platform is almost very clear.
Yeah,
I think it's above that.
So let's challenge that for a minute, right? So let's challenge that, because we talk, again, about sunk cost. So, yeah, sure, if I was setting up SharePoint from scratch, I used to take people, one of the large hardware vendors had a sizing calculator where you could sort of size up a SharePoint farm based on a certain number of users, and it would calculate storage and processors and blades and things like that. But if you're an organization that is already using SharePoint, right, and is looking at their next upgrade potentially, the decision about whether to go to the cloud or not gets, or to more of a SaaS service or not, gets interesting, because now I've already made that hardware investment. So per the question from the audience before, what is it that's compelling about Office 365, let's say, or a sort of hosted version of SharePoint, where I'm going to get sort of best-of-breed support, like with Rackspace? What's the compelling reason for me? The simple calculation is startup cost, but for most of our customers, they're already on a flavor of SharePoint. Yep. So the ROI calculation is really more about from today forward, and what is it getting me? So I think from that, we want to focus maybe not so much on hardware, but on maintenance costs and support costs in that ROI calculation.
Yeah, so let me kind of change the discussion a little bit. I think that that last comment was a good segue. We've talked about this before. I know there's probably a wide range of people that are on the call. They're looking at this, whether they're a decision maker, and there's probably some folks on here that are IT pros and devs that are kind of all kicking the tires on this idea of does it make sense for us to go to the cloud? So I'll throw it over to Todd. Todd, I know that we've talked before on some of these presentations about the evolution of the IT pro role. What does that look like? But as it relates to ROI in the cloud, how does, for the various platforms, what kind of administration costs are we looking at if you're going, SharePoint Online versus if you're going something along the lines of like PaaS versus an IaaS solution?
Yeah, so that's one of the things, and this is going to end up sounding like a sales pitch for Rackspace, and I apologize, that's not the intent. But keeping SharePoint folks on staff, paying them, keeping them fed, keeping them happy, can get kind of expensive. And so depending,
sending them to Ignite.
Pardon?
I was saying sending them to Ignite, right?
Yeah, sending them to Ignite, exactly. So depending on, the size of your company and what your company does with SharePoint, you may end up spending a lot of money to keep the SharePoint guy on staff to keep your SharePoint servers running. And so there's an ROI to figure there. So as we've talked about in this call earlier, the cloud means different things to different people. So if you're doing an Office 365 type cloud, then there's fewer of those people that you have to keep paying for. You have to pay something for the server and for the site, the tenant and all that, but you're not paying as many people and potentially not paying as many high paid people as you would if you had the servers on site. So if you want to go for the cloud that way and do an Office 365 thing, you have less administrative overhead. If you do something like Rackspace, we've got a couple of different options. We've got an analogous option to Office 365, which is, again, we take care of everything, power, network, servers, the whole thing, patching. So you don't have to worry about any of that. But we also have another cloud offering that's a dedicated support. So that's kind of the platform as a service or the PaaS stuff. And so there, you don't have to pay for admin guys to keep the servers on and your network room's cool and all that. We do all that, but you can have your SharePoint guy. So depending on what your company does and what pieces you want to hold on to, we've got different options. And then the ROI on that is just depending on, what pieces you've chosen to do, what pieces you want us to do with the different costs. And I think it's really compelling. It's almost, I feel like we're almost getting past that thing where Costco talks about how they only have two brands of ketchup. They don't want to get people confused and give them too many options. And I think we're kind of right at that right space, at least at Rackspace. We've got you do nothing, you can do everything, and then we've kind of got something in the middle. And it depends on your strengths. One of the other folks mentioned, your IT guys, if you're doing a job where you're swapping out hard drives and power supplies, that wasn't probably a great IT job in the first place. I agree. I was that guy. It wasn't a lot of fun. And I think the evolution of IT jobs is this kind of thing, becoming cloud. So I'm doing this stuff for Ignite, and that's figuring out authentication, and it's figuring out bandwidth, it's all that kind of stuff. And that's part of IT now. And I think that's a funner job, and it's better to the business than, the guy that swaps out memory chips. I think it's a good
So let me ask this question. Someone else makes a comment, maximum total value equals ROI plus collaboration plus process improvement. The ROI calculation appears to be IaaS traditional data center costs versus mix of PaaS and SaaS costs. And that was a question. But they also make the question that basically, if we're going to run hybrid, does that mean that it's just that the customers are going to be spending double in order to keep up with hybrid? So, Dux, do you think, for customers that are looking at, kind of getting the best of both worlds, is hybrid really double the cost of everything?
Let me think about that. In most cases, no. And it doesn't. I think in most cases it'll still be less. At the worst case scenario, it'll be close to what you're spending today. And the reason why you may go that route, even if you're spending the same thing, is from a elasticity, scalability perspective, and just capabilities that you can't do or you can't get on premises. There may be instances that it may cost more. For example, again, if you're streaming the Super Bowl game, I would think that costs a good chunk of change because there's millions and millions of people watching, at least for that instance. But I would say in most cases, no, it's not going to double your expenditure.
Yeah, and actually, I would jump on that and say that there are very few customers that I've talked to who decide to move on to something like a fully SaaS version of SharePoint in a hybrid mode midstream, right? Usually it's I'm either going to upgrade to the next version of SharePoint or I'm going to go with a cloud offering. So I think standing still, most companies aren't really making a move. If I go to the cloud, it will be instead of going to the next on-prem version. That's what we see most often.
Yeah, Todd, what do you think?
So I kind of lost my train of thought there listening to those guys. So I agree with you. I think that the going, so it's paying double. So I think the hybrid thing is going to be, for most folks, kind of a transitionary thing. It's going to be kind of dipping your toe in the water of the cloud thing and then figuring out which workloads make sense. But the other thing about paying double is, depending on the license type that you have, so, a lot of companies, and I'm talking big companies, have volume license agreements with Microsoft to get the Office clients and things like that. A lot of those include some SharePoint Online licenses of some variety, some shape or another. So it's money you've already spent. It's a sunk cost. But some of that gives you the opportunity to do things like move your MySites into the cloud. And it doesn't cost you any extra. It's money you're already spending. And so you can play with some of that hybrid stuff at no additional cost, but then moving things like MySites into the cloud and other things like that keep you from having to spend more money on-prem for database servers and things like that because you're moving all that storage. And those, the OneDrive for Business, the cloud MySites, I think they either have 1 terabyte storage limits or unlimited, which for MySites is, 1 terabyte would be unlimited. So I guess my thing is pay attention to your licenses and see what you're already paying for and what you're getting, what you pay for, because you might be able to do some of this hybrid stuff for little to no extra money.
Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of jump in here, and I'm gonna give I'm gonna put on my product manager hat for a second. So there is a document, because I brought this up at one point to Microsoft, and please, someone don't go quote me and say John said this specifically. But there is an article out there that I believe is on it's on an MSDN, or I'm sorry, it's on a Microsoft blog that talks about having the ability to apply your client access licenses or your CALs that you get via Office 365 to your on-prem SharePoint deployment, so that in the context of, you're not necessarily paying for your users twice. You still have to license your servers and everything like that, but you have the ability where it's not like you have to double dip to get your users. So if you're out there talking to any of your Microsoft people, just kind of ask them, and if you're considering this hybrid scenario like what Todd was saying, where you want to kind of dip your toe into it and you're looking at moving and you're kind of trying to do it in the most cost-effective way, you can leverage Office 365 and apply the client access licenses that you get into your on-prem. That should be something they're familiar with. If not, like I said, there is an article out there, and if anybody is interested in tracking that article down, I'd be glad to send it to you. It's sent to me by a Microsoft person. You can tweet at me, or you can shoot me an email. My email address is john.ross@rackspace.com. I'd be happy to forward that out to you. So, good information. So, there was somebody that made a comment. They said, "Don't change the subject. Answer that question. It's a great one." So I'm not really sure what that question was in particular. So if anybody would just want to clarify on that question, specifically referencing that they were the one that said don't change the subject and which question we should ask, that would be great. So let's move on to some other topics. There's another question that's coming in. Somebody says, how about service level agreements? When we talk about training, what do you feel? I'll throw this over to Dux again. I know you're kind of talking with a lot of your customers as it relates to where they're looking for ROI and things like that. But in terms, what kind of training are people looking for as they're making the jump to cloud? What kind of training do they need? What kind of ROI do you think you can realize by training and ramping your people up on kind of the cloud side of things?
Sure. When we think about training, there's really two aspects to it. One is training with your existing IT team. Certainly, the existing IT folks would have to keep up and learn about how infrastructure is different in the cloud. If they're doing federation with their AD, they got to learn that. So that's one part, the IT folks, getting them ramped up, getting them trained. And from where they can get that, there's tons of resources. So, for example, Microsoft alone, if you go to Microsoft Virtual Academy, there's a lot of great, like, full-on training courses for free that they can watch. Bill Bear had a great course there on setting up hybrid environments. So that's for IT. From an end-user point of view, I think this is very important, very critical. And I think it's an exciting time, especially with the cloud, because when you think about training, one thing I keep stressing and telling my customers is you want to think about how do you sustain this in the long term. So I always talk about sustainable adoption, where training is only one component. The beauty of this is with the cloud and the ever-changing introduction of new capabilities, new use cases, there's tons of resources there. So where should they go? One, I mean, certainly you could do your traditional training. We've got good friends at Critical Path who has a lot of great training courses, both for IT and both for the business. But second is, when you think about training, almost always from an end user point of view, while it's great you send them to a 1-day, 2-day, couple-hour training learning about SharePoint, all the capabilities, you're not really training them on the cloud. So that's one. Second, if you can, it would be great if users are trained around the business context of why they need certain things. So, for example, what I always talk to customers is when you want end-user training, do training on the context of how they do their work. So things like, doing project collaboration, scheduling or facilitating meetings, or how can they better share content, be it internally, externally. So do it around the context and then showcase the capabilities of things like SharePoint or other cloud-based technologies. And then second, apart from that context-based learning, make sure that you provide an on-demand learning mechanism. So traditionally what we would do as IT is, okay, we'll have a training portal or FAQ site, which is okay, but realistically end users won't go there if they need help. Because end users, when they need help, they need it now, and they need it wherever they are in the environment. So I always recommend solutions out there like Visual SP or Content Panda, which is cloud ready as well, so that let's say they're in a document library and for some reason they don't know how to upload multiple documents. With tools like Visual SP, they can go on the tab, a help tab would show up, and in context video, a little, couple-second video will pop up and say, this is how you upload with multiple documents. So just-in-time, on-demand learning is also critical. So the third aspect of training, so I talked about the first aspect, the actual training to get them onboarded, and if you can make it business context, and certainly you can provide other resources to learn more about other features. Number two is the just-in-time learning, just-in-time training, where if you can, make it available wherever they are in the environment. And then third is, which is very, very important, and not a lot of organizations do this, is the idea of peer-to-peer learning. So for example, with SharePoint 2013 or even SharePoint Online is you can just take advantage of things like communities or even Yammer, creating a Yammer group where you allow the users themselves to share use cases on how they use the technology. Or, for example, and one customer I work with is every month they encourage different business units just to share what they did with their SharePoint environment. Like, it could be automating expense reimbursement process or making sure that instead of sending attachments all the time, they can work on the same Excel file on a document library. And then reward these people too. So with the communities feature, you can give people points or do a little gamification, end of the month, give them awards. So that way learning would be more stickier and be more relevant. So again, in short, 3 modes of learning. The immediate learning, just-in-time learning, and then use case sharing amongst different business users.
All right. Well, we've got a little bit less than got about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna blaze through. And there's one question that came in at the very beginning. I'm gonna throw it over to Sham. You got like 60 seconds to answer this question. The question is, do you have any recommendation on a migration tool to migrate from on-prem to Office 365? This is a softball, so go for it, Sean.
Where could you find one of those?
So, AvePoint. We've got products and solutions to help you with all phases of the migration project, pre-migration, during the migration, and afterwards. I think definitely chat with us.
Yeah, and I think that the quick and dirty on how we approach a migration is we approach it as a project, right, with a full discovery phase, a planning of whatever mappings and data transformations need to take place, an execution stage, iteration, and then sort of the ability to recap and have a full history on what was migrated, what succeeded, what didn't succeed, when it was migrated, and so forth. And later this year, we'll be adding to that with the ability to initiate that migration process from the end user base. So now you can push out to the user base to say, hey, I know we're going to this future platform, whether it's the next version of SharePoint, another hosted version of SharePoint, or SharePoint Online, and leave it in the hands of the people that own the data to determine what and when needs to be migrated.
Cool. All right. So there's another question that came in. Todd seemed like he was chomping at the bit to answer this one. Todd, you got like 60 seconds. Someone wants to know more about the ROI. Or wait, no, that was not the question.
That's not it.
It was, how do you factor in the reduced functionality of the cloud version versus on-prem SharePoint 2010?
So John and I were chatting back and forth, and he thought I was joking when I said I had an answer for this. But Microsoft has quietly been slipping in hybrid functionality to SharePoint 2010. I'm as surprised as you guys are. So the February 2015 CU for SharePoint 2010 quietly added this ability to move my sites off of on-prem 2010 into SharePoint Online. So just like the 2013 thing, you set it up, you say move them out, and it'll bop them out there. You got to do all the same stuff. You got to set it up with your Office 365 temps. You got to figure out authentication, all that. But it works with SharePoint 2010. And I talked about that a little bit last night on my podcast, and Bill Baer just happened to be stopping in, and he said that making hybrid work for SharePoint 2010, there's going to be more stuff. There's going to be more options. Not to the level that there is for 2013, but you 2010 folks that are staying strong, there will be some options, and the OneDrive for Business thing is just the first one of those. So if you got questions about that, you can hit me up on Twitter at Todd Clint, or email me todd.clint@rackspace.com, and I'll put you in the right direction.
All right, we got 2 minutes, and we got to turn and burn here because I think break talk might cut us off if we run long. But I'm going to go around the room here, and I want to hear one thing. If for customers that are still on-prem today and they're thinking about making the move to the cloud, I want to hear one thing. What is your top big reason why SharePoint customers that are on-prem today should be looking to move to the cloud? So we'll start it off, John Peluso, one thing.
So I would say that my answer would depend on the type of cloud you're thinking of moving to. Certainly if you're going to an IaaS version of a cloud where someone's going to host your servers, but you're still responsible for the application, the reduced burden of support and the ability to take your IT team and utilize them more in driving business value is definitely the driving factor there. If you're talking about a SharePoint Online SaaS offering, I think that it's worth it to take a look at some of the things that Microsoft's doing around compliance in Office 365. They know that that's a sticking point. And certainly I would love to sell you governance and compliance solutions that I think are more complete than what Microsoft's offering, but the ones they're offering are absolutely free today. And so that's a compelling thing for people that are looking for more control of their data.
Hey, Todd, give me one thing.
Better functionality for people with phones and tablets and stuff like that. Once you get your stuff into Office 365, it's accessible from the internet. It's got better clients than the on-prem stuff, so it gives the ability to do stuff with tablets and phones. Eke a little bit more work out of your workforce.
Dux, what's your one thing?
One thing is SharePoint infrastructure is not your core business. There's no excuse.
Awesome. Sham?
Don't be afraid to dip your toes. Moving to the cloud isn't an all-or-nothing commitment. Pick something nice and simple like OneDrive for Business that can have immediate value and go to that first. I don't think you're making this big leap. The cloud's not a scary place.
Awesome. Well, we're running a little bit over now. I want to thank everybody for joining us. This is a really fun discussion. This has been a fun series that we've done. If you're interested in getting some more information about us, you can always check out AvePoint at avepoint.com, and then they have you can go to avepoint.com. You can hit them up on their number or give them a call or shoot them an email. Reach out on Twitter. You know how to find all of us that are on the call. If you're looking to chat with any of us over at Rackspace, you can check out our website, SharePoint.Rackspace.com. That's the URL that's in the upper right-hand corner is the main one. But if you go to SharePoint.Rackspace.com, that's the SharePoint specific team. Email us, hit us up on Twitter. But again, I want to thank everybody for coming out. Please feel free to reach out to us through social media. If you have any questions that we didn't get to and you want to make sure that we cover it, you can reach out to me, john.ross@rackspace.com, and I'll make sure I get it to any of the presenters. But thanks again, everybody. It's been fun. Hope to see everybody at Ignite.
See ya.